Civil War? What's that? You know what? Never mind. What Hello, I'm Ann Gilchrist, Walt Whitman's #1 fan and host of Walt Whitman News. Today I will be doing an in-depth look at Walt Whitman's poem To My Soul and its later edition, As Nearing Departure. Walt wrote the first manuscript of To My Soul in 1860 and first published it in the 1861 edition of Leaves of Grass. The much altered As Nearing Departure came out in 1867 and appeared in Walt Whitman's first post-Civil War edition of Leaves of Grass. Today we will be discussing what changes when Walt Whitman rewrites the poem in 1867. But who better to talk about the different versions of this incredible poem than Walt Whitman himself? Or should I say, themselves? Oh, here they both are. Why don't you guys introduce yourselves? 1860 Walt Whitman, you can go first. Hey, I'm 1860 Walt Whitman. I live in Brooklyn, and I'm an editor for the Brooklyn Daily Times. But most importantly, I'm an up-and-coming writer. I am the next great poet of not only our generation, but every generation to come after us. No one really understands my greatness yet, but they will, trust. Thank you, 1860 Walt Whitman. How about you, 1867 Walt Whitman? Hey, I'm 1867 Walt Whitman. I was living in Washington, D.C. for a while, but now I'm back home. And yeah, poet. Still working on Leaves of Grass. #3 is the charm. Wow, me from the future. You're really letting the beard go, huh? What have you been writing? Has our poetry reached great fame? Sure, yeah, you could say that. We're definitely way more popular after the Civil War. Civil War? What's that? You know what? Never mind. What I'm hearing is that people are finally starting to get our genius. Thanks for the intro, guys. While we have you here today, I wondered if you could discuss your poem, As Nearing Departure. Nearing Departure? No, that's not the title. That's what I titled it in the manuscript, but that's not the title anymore. It's actually titled As Nearing Departure, which is what we put as the first line when the poem used to be To My Soul. Why would you do that? I titled it To My Soul to make it less scary and less focused on death. Oh, that poem's about death, all right. Well, it's not all about death. It's about the soul and the human spirit and what we do and how we make, what we do with life while we're alive. Here, let me see what the poem looks like now. Oh my God! What did you do to my beautiful poem? You took out an entire stanza. Oh yeah, all of that joys in the open air and continual good mumbo jumbo. Yeah, got rid of all of that. Why would you do that? My poem was brilliant. Now it's all deathy and sad. Listen, kid, you don't get it yet, but you will. I've seen tens of thousands of people dealing with war and pain, suffering, and death. I just couldn't ignore the realities of facing death anymore. But how could you ignore the realities of life and the impact of the human spirit? Listen, kid, I'm not saying all that isn't true. Here, take a look at the poem yourself. Look at that last line. It is still true and enough that we have positively appeared in our lifetimes, and our souls are an important part of us that still continue after our death. However, I have to acknowledge the painful truth of death. Okay, well, why did you get rid of the lips of my comrade line? I made sure that was in the published version, even though it wasn't in my manuscript. Is camaraderie not important to us anymore? Comradeship and close relationships with our fellow men is still very important. Actually, exceptionally important when we're talking about death. We need to be there to comfort our fellow comrades. However, the key to this specific poem is the briefness. The shorter poem really gets the message across and makes it more impactful. But we still have many other poems about our comrades. Well, what about these question marks and ellipses? We, as the great American poet, can't be presenting this image of uncertainty. We know everything. Oh, trust me, we are the great American poet. However, if there's one thing that's incomprehensible in this life, it's death. I understand why you're upset and confused by these changes, but one day you'll understand. Even though the poem is now more centered around death, it still holds the core value and the ideas of the human soul. I kept those last lines for a reason. The soul continues to develop even after we passed. However, now that I grow older, I understand that doesn't mean that death isn't painful and hard. Well, I don't know if I totally agree with you, but you are me and I'm an awesome genius, so maybe I'll get it one day. Well, gentlemen, thank you for joining us here today. It's been a pleasure, and thanks for expressing your visions for these two very different versions of this poem. It is clear the two versions of Walt don't see eye to eye anymore. The 1860 Walt Whitman, his original aim for the poem was to reframe death as a universal and natural experience. But through the changes in the poem and the conversation we saw between these two brilliant but very different versions of Whitman, it is clear that Whitman's mindset regarding death has become corrupted in the wake of the Civil War. And that's all for this segment, but please stay tuned for our next segment where we're going to bring on Peter Doyle, who is a very close friend of Walt's.
But it was really me, Peter Doyle. Let's see what my lover, Walt Whitman, has written.